Welcome back to another episode of True Crime Untold Cases. I'm your host, Harper Quinn. Today we journey to the dense woodlands of Lower Saxony, Germany, where in the summer of 1989, the peaceful Göhrde State Forest became a hunting ground for a methodical killer. Within just 7 weeks, 2 couples were brutally murdered in broad daylight, their bodies discovered hidden among the trees. The forest, once a sanctuary for nature lovers, transformed into a place of terror as locals wondered who among them could be responsible for such calculated violence. Join me as we unravel the chilling story of the Göhrde murders, where a seemingly ordinary carpenter harbored deadly secrets beneath his unassuming facade. Let's begin. Deep in the heart of Lower Saxony, Germany, lies the Göhrde State Forest, a sprawling woodland that spans over 7,400 hectares of dense vegetation and winding trails. In the summer of 1989, this peaceful sanctuary would become the setting for a series of brutal murders that would shake the local community to its core and remain etched in German criminal history. On May 21st, 1989, a Sunday that began like any other, 43-year-old Ursula Reinhold and her 44-year-old partner, Peter Wichmann, decided to spend the afternoon cycling in the Göhrde Forest. The couple, who lived in Hamburg, had driven to the area in their red Volkswagen Golf, parked at one of the forest's designated lots, and set off on what should have been a pleasant bicycle ride through the woods. They would never return to their car. When the couple failed to return home that evening, their families became concerned. Neither Ursula nor Peter were the type to disappear without notice. Both were responsible professionals. Ursula worked as a dental assistant, and Peter was a successful businessman. The following morning, when they didn't show up for work, the alarm was raised. Police began their search in the Göhrde Forest after the couple's car was found in the parking area. The discovery that followed would herald the beginning of a nightmarish investigation. Deep within the forest, approximately 800 meters from their parked vehicle, investigators found the bodies of both victims. They had been brutally murdered, with evidence suggesting they had been attacked suddenly and with extreme violence. The crime scene painted a horrific picture. Both victims had suffered severe head trauma, and investigators determined they had been killed with a heavy object, likely a branch or similar weapon found in the forest. What was particularly disturbing was the methodical nature of the crimes. The killer had taken time to partially conceal the bodies with forest debris, suggesting they were familiar with the area and comfortable enough to remain at the scene. The investigation team, led by the Lower Saxony State Criminal Police Office, meticulously combed the area for evidence. They found the couple's bicycles hidden in the undergrowth, and several personal items were missing, including Ursula's purse and some jewelry. This suggested robbery might have been a motive, but the level of violence indicated something far more sinister. The murders sent shockwaves through the local communities. The Göhrde Forest, once a popular destination for hikers, cyclists, and nature enthusiasts, became a place of fear. Local newspapers warned residents to avoid the area, particularly if traveling alone. Police increased their patrols, but the vast expanse of the forest made comprehensive surveillance impossible. Just when the community was beginning to process this tragic event, the unthinkable happened. Barely 7 weeks later, on July 12, 1989, another couple fell victim to what appeared to be the same killer. Ingrid Vanbier, 47, and her companion Bernd Michael Köpping, 44, had also chosen the Göhrde Forest for an afternoon outing. Like the previous victims, they parked their car, this time a white Mercedes, in one of the forest's parking areas. The similarities to the first double murder were impossible to ignore. When the couple failed to return home, a search was initiated. Their bodies were discovered approximately 1 kilometer from where they had parked, again in a secluded area of the forest. The manner of death was strikingly similar. Both victims had suffered severe head trauma, and their bodies had been partially concealed. The second double murder amplified the terror in the region. The killer had struck again in broad daylight, in almost the same location, using the same method. This wasn't just a random act of violence. It was the work of someone who had chosen the Göhrde Forest as their hunting ground. Investigators noted several crucial patterns. Both attacks occurred on warm days when the forest would typically attract visitors. The killer seemed to specifically target couples, suggesting they were either capable of overpowering multiple victims simultaneously or had developed a strategy to control their victims effectively. The crime scenes indicated a level of preparation and familiarity with the forest that pointed to someone with local knowledge. The police investigation expanded significantly after the second double murder. Hundreds of officers were involved, conducting extensive searches of the forest and surrounding areas. They interviewed local residents, forest workers, and anyone who might have witnessed suspicious activity. Behavioral analysts were brought in to develop a profile of the killer. The profile suggested they were looking for someone who likely lived or worked in the area, someone who knew the forest well enough to move through it confidently and choose locations where they were unlikely to be disturbed. The killer was probably physically strong, given the nature of the attacks, and might have had military or hunting experience. One of the most chilling aspects of the case was the killer's apparent comfort with remaining in the forest. The crime scenes showed no signs of panic or rushed actions. Instead, they revealed a methodical perpetrator who took their time with their victims, even after death. This suggested someone who felt completely at ease in the forest environment, perhaps someone who considered it their territory. The investigation also revealed that several items had been taken from both couples. While robbery appeared to be part of the killer's pattern, investigators believed the taking of personal effects might have served another purpose: trophies. This behavior is often associated with serial killers who keep items from their victims as mementos of their crimes. As the summer of 1989 progressed, the Göhrde Forest became virtually deserted. Local businesses that relied on tourism suffered as visitors avoided the area. The once peaceful forest had become synonymous with fear and death. Police checkpoints were established at forest entry points, and warning signs were posted throughout the area. The investigation team faced numerous challenges. The forest's dense vegetation made it difficult to find physical evidence, and any that might have existed was likely compromised by weather conditions and wildlife. The vast area that needed to be searched stretched resources thin, and with each passing day, the chances of finding crucial evidence diminished. The media coverage was intense, with national newspapers dubbing the perpetrator the Göhrde Killer. The case became one of Germany's most notorious unsolved crimes, drawing comparisons to other forest-related murders in European criminal history. The pressure on law enforcement to catch the killer was enormous, but despite their efforts, solid leads remained elusive. As autumn approached in 1989, investigators began to explore connections between the Göhrde murders and other unsolved cases in the region. Of particular interest was the disappearance of Birgit Meyer, a 41-year-old woman who had vanished from her home in Lüneburg, approximately 40 kilometers from the Göhrde Forest, on August 14, 1989. Though initially treated as a separate case, similarities in the time frame and geographic proximity would later prove significant. The investigation team established a special commission, codenamed Soko Göhrde, dedicated solely to solving these murders. They began the painstaking process of reviewing every piece of evidence, re-interviewing witnesses, and developing new investigative strategies. One of their primary focuses was analyzing the precise locations where the bodies were found, believing the killer's choice of dump sites might reveal something about their knowledge of the forest. Forensic analysts made several important observations about the crime scenes. The killer had shown remarkable consistency in their method of attack. In both cases, the victims appeared to have been approached from behind, suggesting the perpetrator had stalked them through the forest before striking. The similar head injuries indicated the same weapon might have been used in both attacks, though this weapon was never found. The investigation also revealed that both couples had been attacked in locations that were just off the main trails, but concealed enough to prevent immediate discovery. This indicated the killer had carefully selected these spots, possibly having scouted them in advance. The positioning suggested someone who knew exactly where the forest sight lines were broken and how to use the natural cover to their advantage. One of the most intriguing aspects of the case was the killer's ability to control two victims simultaneously. Criminal psychologists suggested this pointed to someone with experience in handling hostile situations, perhaps someone with military or law enforcement background. The killer might have used a ruse to approach the couples, possibly posing as a forest worker or official to gain their trust initially. The investigation team also focused on the missing items from both couples. From the first victims, Ursula Reinald's purse containing 300 Deutsche Marks was taken, along with her gold jewelry. From the second couple, Ingrid Warmbier's handbag and Bernd Michael Köpping's wallet were stolen. However, not all valuable items were taken, suggesting the selection of these items might have had personal significance to the killer beyond their monetary value. By late 1989, investigators had interviewed over 1,000 people and collected more than 1,500 pieces of evidence. They had taken hundreds of photographs of the crime scenes and created detailed maps showing every potential entry and exit point in the relevant areas of the forest. Despite this thorough approach, they struggled to develop a clear picture of the killer. One theory that gained traction was that the perpetrator might be someone who worked in or around the forest. The police compiled a list of all forest workers, hunters, and others who had legitimate reasons to be in the Göhrde regularly. This list included both current and former employees, as well as those who held hunting licenses for the area. The investigation also explored the possibility that the killer might have had a connection to the victims, though this seemed increasingly unlikely as no common links could be established between the two couples. Both pairs appeared to have chosen the forest randomly for their outings, making the likelihood of a personal connection to the killer remote. As the investigation continued into 1990, the police received hundreds of tips from the public, each of which had to be carefully evaluated. Many of these leads focused on local individuals known for unusual or suspicious behavior, while others suggested connections to unsolved crimes in other parts of Germany. The sheer volume of information presented a challenge for investigators, who had to balance the need to follow up on potentially valuable leads while avoiding being overwhelmed by false or misleading information. One particularly interesting aspect of the case was the killer's choice of victims. Both couples were middle-aged, financially stable, and from respectable backgrounds. This suggested the killer might have been targeting a specific demographic, perhaps out of some personal motivation or grievance. Criminal profilers suggested the perpetrator might be of similar age to their victims, possibly someone who felt resentment toward people of this social class. The investigation also revealed that both attacks had occurred during what would typically be peak hours for forest visitors. This brazen timing suggested either supreme confidence or reckless disregard for the risk of discovery. It also indicated the killer might have been someone who could move through the forest without arousing suspicion, lending further credence to the theory that they had some official or professional connection to the area. By the end of 1990, the case had consumed thousands of investigative hours and resources, yet seemed no closer to resolution. The lack of progress began to take its toll on both the investigation team and the local community. The forest, once a crown jewel of Lower Saxony's natural heritage, remained largely abandoned by recreational visitors. local authorities faced the difficult task of balancing public safety concerns with the economic impact on the region. The investigation team refused to let the case go cold, however. They continued to develop new theories and explore different angles. One area of focus was the possibility that the killer might have committed similar crimes in other locations. They began a systematic review of unsolved murders and missing persons cases across northern Germany, looking for patterns or similarities that might connect to the Göhrde murders. The team also began to employ new investigative techniques that were becoming available in the early 1990s. They used early versions of geographic profiling to analyze the killer's movement patterns and potential base of operations. This analysis suggested the perpetrator likely lived within a 30-kilometer radius of the forest, as they demonstrated both detailed knowledge of the area and the ability to move freely without attracting attention. The investigation took an unexpected turn in 1993 when police began to look more closely at a carpenter named Kurt Werner Wichmann. Living in Lüneburg, Wichmann had a history of violent behavior and had previously served time for attempted rape in the 1970s. What made him particularly interesting to investigators was his intimate knowledge of the Göhrde Forest and his habit of spending time there. Wichmann had carefully constructed a seemingly normal life, working as a carpenter and maintaining a modest home with his wife. However, beneath this facade lay disturbing evidence of a much darker character. He was known to be meticulous and controlling, traits that aligned with the organized nature of the Göhrde crimes. The breakthrough came when investigators discovered that Wichmann had been in the vicinity of the forest during both sets of murders in 1989. His vehicle, a red Volkswagen Jetta, had been spotted by witnesses near one of the parking areas where the victims had left their cars. However, before police could question him thoroughly, Wichmann seemed to sense the net closing in. In April 1993, after being involved in a suspicious car accident, Wichmann fled from the hospital where he was being treated. 2 days later, he was found dead in a forest near Scharnebeck, having died by suicide. This dramatic turn of events initially appeared to be the end of the investigation, but it was actually just the beginning of uncovering the true extent of Wichmann's crimes. When police searched Wichmann's property, they discovered a carefully hidden underground bunker. The contents were disturbing: handcuffs, weapons, and various items that could be used to restrain and torture victims. They also found women's jewelry and personal effects that would later be linked to various unsolved crimes, including items belonging to the Göhrde victims. Perhaps most significantly, investigators found evidence linking Wichmann to the disappearance of Birgit Meyer, the woman who had vanished from Lüneburg in August 1989. Wichmann had done carpentry work at her house shortly before she disappeared. Despite extensive searches at the time, her body would not be found for decades. The investigation team began to piece together a disturbing pattern of behavior spanning many years. Wichmann had developed a sophisticated method of hunting his victims, using his knowledge of the forest and his unassuming appearance to approach them. His carpenter's van allowed him to move through the area without arousing suspicion, and his local connections meant he was familiar with the forest's most isolated spots. Further investigation revealed that Wichmann had created several hidden caches throughout the forest, places where he could store weapons or other materials. These locations were carefully chosen and well concealed, demonstrating his methodical approach to his crimes. The discovery of these sites helped explain how he had been able to operate in the forest without leaving obvious evidence. The case took another significant turn in 2017, nearly 28 years after the murders, when Birgit Meyer's remains were finally discovered buried beneath the garage of Wichmann's former property. This discovery confirmed what investigators had long suspected, that Wichmann's crimes extended beyond the Göhrde murders, and that he had been operating as a serial killer for years. the investigation team now believes that Wichmann may have been responsible for as many as 24 murders over several decades. His suicide in 1993 meant that many questions would remain forever unanswered, but the evidence found at his property and the similarities between his known crimes and other unsolved cases painted a picture of a prolific and methodical killer. The Göhrde case has left a lasting impact on German criminal history and the local community. The forest, while no longer associated with active danger, remains a place of somber reflection for many locals. The case has also influenced how German police approach complex investigations, particularly those involving potentially linked crimes across different jurisdictions. The story of the Göhrde murders serves as a haunting reminder of how a seemingly ordinary person can harbor extraordinary capacity for evil. Kurt Werner Wichmann had managed to live among his neighbors for years, carrying out his crimes while maintaining a facade of normalcy. His ability to compartmentalize his life, working as a carpenter by day while committing horrific murders in his spare time, demonstrates the challenging nature of identifying and catching serial killers. The case also highlights the importance of preserving evidence and maintaining open investigations, even when leads run cold. It was only through persistent investigation and the application of new forensic techniques that the full scope of Wichmann's crimes began to emerge. The discovery of Birgit Meyer's remains in 2017 provided crucial closure for her family and confirmed the investigators' long-held suspicions about Wichmann's involvement in her disappearance. Today, the Göhrde Forest has largely returned to its original purpose as a place of natural beauty and recreation. However, the events of 1989 have left an indelible mark on the region's collective memory. The case remains a significant part of German criminal history, studied by law enforcement professionals and criminologists for its insights into serial killer behavior and investigation techniques. The legacy of the Göhrde murders continues to influence modern criminal investigations in Germany. The case demonstrated the importance of considering connections between seemingly unrelated crimes and the value of maintaining detailed records and evidence even after a suspect's death. It also showed how crucial it is to look beyond the obvious and consider all possibilities, no matter how unlikely they might seem at first glance. The story of the Göhrde murders serves as a sobering reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of ordinary life and the importance of remaining vigilant in the pursuit of justice, no matter how much time has passed.